Hi, I'm Annie Green, and I want to welcome you back to our series by the International Institute for Knowledge and Innovation. The series today is the Leading in Extraordinary Times, and this is session 7 of that series. This one will be held by Dr. Bill Halal, and it is the virtual organization has arrived, so we need to make it work. Dr. Bill Halal has served as an aerospace engineer on NASA's Apollo program, an Air Force officer, a Silicon Valley manager, and is Professor Emeritus of Technology Innovation at George Washington University. He is the founder of TechCast Global LLC, a continuous forecasting organization cited by the National Academies, featured in the Washington Post, Newsweek, and The Futurist, and has been recognized as possibly one of the best forecasting systems available. Bill has authored many books and has always been fascinated with the revolutionary power of technological change driving us into a high-tech global order. Bill recently launched Strategic Forum, a bi-monthly virtual conference that brings together prominent thought leaders to collectively provide strategic solutions to the transformative changes of our time. So with that, I'm actually going to turn this over to Bill so that he can begin his presentation.
Thank you, Andy. Andy, that was a eloquent introduction. I'm grateful, so generous. Could you pull up my presentation, please?
Yes, I am going for it. And here we are. It should be coming up momentarily. And I will put it in presentation format for you.
Good. Good. Now, I think this is a hot topic because organizations are still having trouble getting people to come back to the office. The COVID pandemic accomplished what we've been trying to do for 20 or 30 years. It got people out of the office using their IT systems to work offline or to work remotely. So that's a remarkable thing. It shows that there are benefits from a crisis like the pandemic. The pandemic got us to do it. The problem is that corporations and government agencies can't get people to go back to the office now. Now that they've seen that this works, they don't want to go back. And it's created a terrible dilemma. They don't know how to manage their workforce if they're not present. And all that office space in downtown cities is languishing for lack of use. Now, I think we can turn that into an opportunity because what this means is the virtual organization is here. It's now here. We're not working close face to face. We're working remotely. So that's a reality, and we just have to learn how to turn that into an advantage. It can be an advantage. We can turn this into an organizational system that is more convenient for the employees, and there's no reason it can't be just as productive for the corporation and governments as well. But we just have to think differently about the way we run organizations. So this talk is going to focus on how we can make this work, how we can make the virtual organization that we're stuck with now, that is here, how we can make that work. And as I go along here, I want to ask for your comments and questions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Annie? Somebody?
I'm here, Bill. It's not taking it for a second. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to. Oh, this is it's sticking with my.
Try to scroll down.
Okay. For some reason I'm locked into it. Give me a second here. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then I'll bring it right back up, okay?
Hi, Rudy. Nice to have you join us.
Good morning to you. Good morning to all.
Good morning. There we go.
Good. Okay. No, you're at the very end.
Oh, at the very end.
Yeah.
I am so sorry. I don't know why this is happening.
Yeah.
Let's do it one more time. You all bear with us. I think there's a gremlin out there today, but we're going to get through this and it's going to be an outstanding presentation.
Try it this way, in this format.
For some reason, it's try it which way and which format.
The first format.
Okay.
Maybe that'll do it.
Well, you don't want to do in that format, I don't think, but let's take it back up to the top because apparently I'm going to reestablish it so that hopefully it'll bring it up in that
Yeah,
view.
just leave it here and try and go to the next slide.
Okay, so you want it to, let me make it a little bit larger.
Okay, good. We don't have the whole slide though. That's okay. That's good enough. Okay. Now this is, I think, one of the key ways to start thinking about how we can do this. We have to think about making organizations self-organizing, because if you can't have people in the office, you can't organize them yourself. So it has to be a self-organizing system. This is a concept that I've developed with Russell Ackoff. If you remember Russell, he died about 5 or 10 years ago. He was a brilliant guy. And together we developed this concept of internal markets. Internal markets is the alternative to hierarchy. There are only two ways to run economic activity. You can either plan it, that is a hierarchical control, or you can use market mechanisms. And this was a concept based on market mechanisms. So here are the principles for doing this. The key idea is to create internal market economies of self-managed units unified into a collaborative whole. That is just like a real economy. You want to turn an organization into an economic system, basically. Self-managed units integrated into a unified whole. And there are three key points here to do that. First, you form internal enterprise units. It could be a small team of just 5 to 7 people. It could be a complete division of 50 or maybe hundreds of people. But the key is to make that unit, whatever units you have in the organization, look like enterprises. You link rewards and resources to performance. That is, you have to measure performance. You can't just measure behavior. You have to measure outcome of the unit. However, that can be done. And then you allocate resources to them in proportion to their performance and the rewards for the managers and the employees, so that you create really the conditions of an enterprise unit, a real business unit, the way a business unit would exist in the real world outside of the organization. You want to create that kind of a system. The kind of system that exists in the external economy. And then you provide them with wide freedom. There are going to be some constraints, obviously, whatever they are, but they should be minimal. And you just leave them alone to let them do it any way they want. We'll show what that turns out to accomplish. And then you create the infrastructure that supports these units, IT systems, finance, the culture, and so forth. And you monitor and revise this system until you get it working the way you want it. And then finally, the executive's job is to provide leadership and support rather than monitor the behavior of people and the details. They simply stay in touch with the leaders of the units, with the units themselves, and see how they're doing, how can they help get them working well, and encourage them to collaborate with other units, and they coach and problem solve. It's a very simple idea. But if you can do these things, you would, in fact, have transformed an organization from a planned system, a hierarchical system, into an internal economy. a self-organizing internal economy. Let me stop here and see if people have any questions or comments. No? Okay, let's,
No, none at this,
pardon me?
nothing at this stage, Bill, thanks.
Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah, now here's a nice way to see what we're doing. We're creating a new regime of control. There are 4 different regimes noted here in this schematic. The hierarchy regime, which is the traditional model of the organization, and that's where the people that the CEO controls, they're not responsible for bottom line performance. They are given their budgets, and the CEO controls their behavior by supervising what they're doing, and that's traditional. That's the hierarchical domain. And there's also on the far other end, outside end, there's the external market, of course, and then there's something in between. The alliances, these are organizations that you've chosen to work with. They're still in the external market, but you have a collaborative relationship with them. Well, what we're talking about doing is creating a new regime, the internal market regime. And these are units, you can see right here if you follow my cursor, that are still under the control of the enterprise. They're still part of the corporate system, but they're internal enterprise units. They operate independently. They simply are responsible for their performance, and they can do it any way they want. We'll say more about that later. So that's what puts this in perspective. It's a new regime of behavior within an ordinary organization, as opposed to the hierarchy regime and the alliances regime. Is that clear? Okay, Annie?
Did you want the next slide, Bill?
Yeah, this is good. Thank you. Now, here's the way this might look. It's fascinating. This is a really different way of thinking about an organization. You have here, just as an example, 3 product divisions, and you have on the left the staff functions, R&D, manufacturing, marketing. And on the right, you have regions where the products are sold. Well, what you've done here is create a system that operates like a market system. The product divisions spin off these business units, and each one is an internal market, is an internal enterprise. Excuse me, I'm going to close this door. Excuse me, just a second. Okay, so and each of these are all internal enterprises. They're held accountable for their performance, as we said, and they're given resources in a proportion to their performance. You know, they can keep the money they create. In other words, the corporation takes a portion of it, of course, for overhead, but they keep the money they create, and they can reward themselves with that money. And now, since they're internal enterprises, they can choose who they're going to work with. They choose if they're going to hire any of these staff functions, R&D, and they pay them for their services. So this is an honest business relationship now. The staff functions are not imposed upon the line units. the way they ordinarily would be. In fact, the product units could go outside of the organization to hire those services if they want, which keeps the internal staff units honest. They now have to compete with the outside suppliers. And then to sell their products, they work with the regions as distributors to sell their products. They, just like an ordinary distributor, they sell their products to the regions, and the regions are profit centers in their own right. And they have their markup and they sell their units. And if they're not happy with the way these people are handling their products, they could conceivably go elsewhere to have their products sold. So what you've done here is you created a lot of entrepreneurial freedom. You've held all of these units accountable on bottom line performance, and then you give them the freedom to do it any way they want. And that is a powerful change. Let's move on, and we'll see more about this. Next slide, Eddie. Any comments about this before we move on? You must be getting confused about this.
Bill,
Okay.
I just have one quick question on the previous slide.
Yeah. You
And
want
it's
to go back
simply,
to
yeah,
that?
I understand the whole notion of freedom and all that. There are, your dashed lines indicate there's a lot of complexity there, a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
How do those various individual units have visibility into what's available within and across those different organizational lines? In other words, they could say, hey, I can go outside and get this, but I have actually worked in organizations where literally the person that they needed help from was directly in the floor in the office above them, and they didn't know about it. So what are your thoughts as to how to gain, if it's self-organizing, how do they gain in visibility and knowledge of who's doing what, that they can draw upon and create synergies both within and across and even outside their own organization?
Well, they ought to know what units exist in their organization. And if they don't, the executives in their job of coaching them could say, you might want to use the R&D. Our R&D people are pretty good. And the unit manager will say, well, we talked to them. I'm not impressed with the way they behave, so I'm going to go somewhere else and get this done. So there are ways they'd find out that, they've got to do search. They've got to do that's one of the costs of doing this. One of the reasons that scholars found to justify hierarchical controls was search costs. There was a whole big deal about that. There's a whole literature on that the reason organizations exist is to avoid search costs. And an entrepreneur has to spend a lot of time finding partners to work with. Well, an organization eliminates those search costs because traditionally you don't have any choices. You work with the staff function that's there. So that's the purpose. That's one of the advantages of the hierarchical organization. It eliminates search costs. It makes it easy to conduct your business. But the cost, of course, has been that bureaucracy and lack of accountability. So when we turn this into a market system, then you have to suffer the search costs. But the search costs are diminished because now we have online systems that allow us to search easily. And that's one of the reasons we've seen the proliferation of more flexible, dynamic organizations, because the online world has decreased the search costs, so that now it's easy to learn how to work with anybody anywhere.
Hey,
That's a really good question. This is a complex issue.
hey, Bill, let me ask you a question with this. In one of yours, you say tie it to performance. I'm trying to envision this being tied to performance when there's so many variables and so many unknowns. And how do you assure that what you're getting in your performance is integrity and quality of feeds?
Well, that's one of one of the things that the executives would hammer out when they set up the system. work with the line units and define what would be an adequate indicators of performance. It could be anything that's agreed upon. Obviously, it could be profit and loss. It could be quality of the service and product. It could be customer satisfaction. It could be employee satisfaction. But so they have to determine as an organization what they're going to be held accountable for. You know, what are the values that are important to that organization? And you know, that's not hard for them to figure it out. So they figure out what are the things they want to hold units accountable for. And then you get measures to get those on a periodic basis. It could be anything. But once it's set up, then you just monitor performance in those terms, and then you forget about what they're doing. You let them do it any way they want. You give them the entrepreneurial freedom they need to do a good job. And that's what's missing in most organizations today. They don't have that entrepreneurial freedom.
And Bill, if I can add, then based on your point, give them the entrepreneurial freedom, but then also give them the enablers. That search problem you mentioned is real, but it's improving. So the leaders then should make sure that the networks and the technology and whatever is in place for them to get that visibility into and across the organization is there. And then you cut them loose. Is that what you were saying?
Exactly. That's the role of the leaders, to coach them and give them the advice they need. Make sure that they're doing well. Make sure
and the tools, right?
And the tools, the infrastructure, a good infrastructure. It's an exciting challenge for an executive to design a sophisticated system like this that will work on its own once you get it set up. It will work by itself once you get it set up. And you don't have to see these people. And that takes us back to the initial problem. Once you get this set up, you don't care where they're located. And they could be located anywhere. By creating a market system, you gain all of this freedom. People can locate wherever they want. They could go to a different country. They could go to a ski resort and work there. You don't care, as long as they meet their performance targets. Let's move on. There's a lot more we want to talk about. And here's this is from the study I did just about a couple of years ago on strategic planning. We updated the concept of strategy for a high-tech world. Here's what we learned. People want these kinds of systems. They see the need for them today. 70% say all units should be involved in strategy formulation. So units should be doing their strategic work. And 55% unit level strategy should be conducted. Look at these comments here. Strategic planning must involve all units of an organization. Technology is disrupting business at an ever accelerating rate. Management needs to change quickly or risk being disrupted themselves. That means you can't run hierarchical systems anymore. We need to change culture, bureaucracy, so yeah. So what I learned from this study, which involved about 50 organizations around the world, is that they're looking for different ways to do strategy. They want to transform the organization into a more entrepreneurial system with units doing strategic planning. Let's move on. Any comments about this? No. Let's move on, Annie. Yeah, so what we're dealing with really is this tension between control and freedom. On the left is the traditional system. You know, you supervise people for accountability. On the right, you just focus on performance. You don't care how they behave and the motivations. You know, you can see the difference. So it's two very different logics, and you don't have to, I think, make a heroic choice of going all the way to a complete market system. You can position the organization somewhere in between, you know, depending on how you design the parameters, how closely you link performance to rewards, for instance. and that sort of thing. So I think organizations have to decide where they want to be on this continuum between hierarchical control and market freedom. That just puts this in perspective. Let's move on, Annie. Now, here's some trends in this direction. Self-managed teams are a big deal. Nokia, Elko, Lufthansa, they do this. Incentives and performance pay. 90% of firms have some kind of performance pay. This is not a radical idea. Staff and support units become profit centers. R&D becomes a profit center. Complete internal market systems, eBay, we'll talk about that later. AB&B, Johnson & Johnson. I'll show you those examples in more detail later. There's a wonderful story about in Indianapolis that Russell Akoff was involved with. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then in the public sector, in education, vouchers, choice, charter schools are all examples of internal market systems. That's why that's becoming a big development in education, and it should be, because it's introducing innovation in education and accountability, the things that you want, accountability and innovation. Let's move on. Okay, here's some great examples. Google uses teams for each project. Each team is a business firm. It's the company is like an incubator with a portfolio of ventures, and that's very common. I have a friend who's a consultant, and he specializes in doing just that, consulting with corporations to see their business units as a portfolio of ventures. Amazon has, this may be old, 60,000 independent companies that sell services to their sites. There are many Amazons, and Amazon is a collection of all of these independent businesses. Johnson & Johnson has been a terrific company because they have traditionally used a decentralized structure of 80 or more self-managed business units. And they're small, 150 employees. They have their own boards of directors, which gives them local autonomy. And here's the story I mentioned about Mexico City that Russell Akoff worked on. Mexico City had an agency that issued licenses of some sort, and it was just terrible bureaucracy with all kinds of graft and corruption. The employees would take bribes to give people prior service, take them to the head of the line. There was no incentive to get the work done, so the applications just stacked up for months or so, and that's when the bribes would come in. People would bribe them to move their application to the front. It was horrible. Everybody complained. And Akoff's brilliant insight was take these same people and restructure the unit. Just spread them throughout the city, provide a dozen or so, transform them into a dozen or so small units in different neighborhoods. Let the employees choose which neighborhood which unit they want to work for, and link their pay to the number of applications they process. And it transformed this organization within weeks, because these people realized that their benefit was to process these people quickly. And so they would, all of a sudden it became friendly. They welcomed people to the door. Buenos dias, what can I do to help you? And the applications just got processed within days. And so it illustrates the importance of holding people accountable for performance and giving them the freedom to do it. That's the key idea. Here's a Chinese company, Haier. 70,000 people, 12,000 or 2,000 self-managed teams, 7 to 10 people. keep a share of the products, of the profits. It's all it exists around the world, really, but it's always relegated to the margins because most organizations kind of feel an obligation to exert hierarchical control. They have a hard time giving up that control. I've got a book. We produced a book, Akoff and I, and some of his cohorts, some of his colleagues, called Internal Markets. It's out there in the market, and it contains a collection of case studies that did this. Wonderful case studies. I recommend it. Let's move on. I think we're almost at the end. I think we are at the end. Okay, the great benefit of this, if you can do it, is that you would create a system that is able to produce constant change. Exactly what's needed today in a world of hyper turbulent competition. And the key idea is the environment is really the source of change, all the energy from the environment. And if you can create an organic system like this, where you have independent business units out there in touch with the environment, and you rely on that energy to harness change, it's a powerful idea. Let me stop here, and we have, I think, 20 minutes to talk. And let's see, what do you think? And let's talk about this. Let's turn off the presentation and let's just talk. Steve, what do you think about all this? Annie? Candace?
This is a matter of empowerment. When you
Pardon
give people the power to change, many times they take that power and they use it in a positive way. So in a sense, that's not really surprising.
Yeah. You empower your employees, but holding them accountable.
Oh yeah, holding them accountable. But I mean,
Yeah.
in the Mexico City example you gave, they probably didn't have any authority to do anything.
Well, they had authority, but they
become lackadaisical.
They had no incentive. They were
right,
regardless of what happened.
Yeah.
You know, so there was they were just functionaires. You know, they took long lunches and gossiped and ignored the customers because it didn't make any difference. They were still being paid. But holding them accountable, you get the incentives right, and you give them the freedom to do it, and then people will respond. Not everybody. Some people can't work under those conditions, but I think at least half of the population can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With good training and supervision, and with leaders there to coach them. And it's a great role for the executives. Now they're not giving orders, they're coaching, they're teaching. And they have to provide a common culture that energizes the organization. You know, otherwise people would, you know, why would they stick around?
But of course, not every executive is capable of doing that.
That's true. That's true.
They're just used to giving orders and, in a sense, being dictatorial. That doesn't work at all.
That's right. That's right. So it's a real challenge for executives. I think this is where we have to go with the increasing remote work. I think this is not a fluke. I don't think this shift to remote work. It's a harbinger of the future, but it's just been thrust upon us by COVID, and it's going to grow. And so I think we just take advantage of it. It's an opportunity to create this kind of entrepreneurial organization that's badly needed to cope with change. And you got to change the whole culture. And young people, it'd be good for young people because they don't want to work in bureaucracies. They want to be in control of their own lives. And here they can own a small unit, like they could if they started a venture outside in the outside world, but they're doing it inside of the organization where they have the support of the organization. So it makes it easier for them. So I think it would appeal, it's what we need to get young people more engrossed, I think, in their work. And to sop up unemployment, it's a powerful idea. It transforms the way we think about management.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're in the gig society where people can create their own jobs and they can be more independent.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see
that's
that.
right.
But I'm thinking when we look at an organization structure right now, and I might be looking at it differently, but I think this is high risk. Simply because I don't know that I see that bureaucracy is actually a deterrent to us anymore. It might be in the federal government, it might be in the military, but in most organizations that I have dealt with and seen, they do not have standard procedures or processes to guide people in how they work. And I even see some of the younger generation that look at me and say, well, how are we to do this? And they don't know. So if you let them go as it is currently, then I find that it's taking twice as long to do things. And it's not their fault because they haven't been given any type of direction to do things. Now, like you said, I know there's a normal distribution curve. I know that 10% of the people will come in, they'll get it right away and they'll do really well. I know that the other 10% probably will never get it, and they may work in a different type of regime. But that 80%, I think that there's a distribution there that will have problems with it if we don't have some type of structure there. And for products, I think it's great. Amazon, yeah, they have 60,000 people, usually independent companies that are working together to sell their products. And you go out and you purchase from them and you use them as the front end. And that works extremely well. But then Amazon as a company, let's look back at how that's actually operating, and that's not operating so well. It doesn't look at the different components of an organization and consider, again, like you said, what bureaucracy or what structure needs to be there. They're over bureaucratic to some of their people because they run them by numbers, and numbers don't necessarily tell you people's performance, and they don't really see some of the quality that's in what they're doing. So I see it, but I can't see it across all organizations. I guess that's what I'm saying. And working within some organizations, I think that it's good that you give people autonomy to do certain things, but I think you need to understand that autonomy within a framework.
Yeah, Amazon's a good example. You're right. There's a conflict in Amazon. They have all of these independent businesses that are part of their suppliers, but their own operations are very hierarchical, and they've turned off their employees. Their employees are very unhappy with it. They could profitably use these concepts in their operations, like a warehouse. They do a lot of work where they have warehouses for fulfillment. They could turn each of those warehouses into an independent profit center, an enterprise, and let those employees who are so disenchanted and bored with their work, let them control that operation. I bet you they would rise to the occasion. Not all of them, but a lot of them would. They could do it. That could be turned into a model of enterprise, really. This can be applied almost anywhere. Any place that any organization that has serves clients can organize itself along these lines. I think you have to look at the. I recommend the book with the case studies. It would give you it's a mind opener. It'd show you how many different organizations have done this so well.
How would this align with knowledge management, Bill?
Well, you're using drawing on the knowledge of the workers, which are typically ignored. You're allowing them to use their knowledge where it's needed, down to grassroots.
So you would only have it at tacit knowledge where it's in their intellectual capital because they're working autonomously. But I'm saying with knowledge management, do we also include the explicit so that you can identify high and low leverage areas?
Yeah, you could still have a knowledge repository where all of the innovative ideas of the line units are stored, collected, and there is a repository available for other units to use. That would work beautifully. because with all of these different units inventing things, they're going to come up with a lot of good ideas. And if they pool those ideas, then they can draw on them.
And this is really a good example of potential for leadership. And we were talking about leadership at extraordinary times. If Amazon were to, as Bill pointed out, take these individual units and run a controlled trial and sort of say, okay, this unit will try this unit will try that, and have the appropriate leadership involved, they might be able to sort out what works best.
Yeah,
And,
that's right. Yeah, these are all experiments, and
oh, experiment, right?
yeah, they gain the knowledge from the experiment, the knowledge where you have successes. That's right. You know,
Jack Welch,
we talk a lot about agile organizations and all that today, but you know, unless you change the structure along these lines, you're just fooling around with you're just working at the margins. You've got to change the basic structure if you really want an agile organization. You've got to create entrepreneurial units that are treated like business units.
well, Jack Welch had, I mean, within what organization was he with? Well, he had the strategic business units, and he created it on the early end of knowledge management, the Trotter Matrix.
Who
And the
did this?
reason being is because he had strategic business units, and he noticed that all of them were not operating at optimum, but that there were some that were, because each of them were independent. And then once he actually he reached out to them, and when they began to evaluate themselves, they could identify the differences in what they were doing. So I'm still thinking you still need to bring that organization together to identify, again, those high and low leverage areas that need to be present in order to make certain that if you have low operating or low operating strategic business units, because they're totally independent, that you can also benefit from the operations of those that are high performance types of strategic business units. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's why I'm thinking that structure needs to still be in place. And I lean toward digital twins. So regardless of how we're operating, even if it's autonomous and you have separate business units that are owned, I'm thinking that we still need the digital twin so that we can have visibility into how the performance or how they're operating.
Oh yeah, there's still some central functions that have to be performed. That's part of the infrastructure.
Okay.
The infrastructure has to have a reservoir of whatever policy constraints are needed, or processes or methods or whatever, and access to all of these good ideas that the units draw on. No, that's exactly right. But this would be a dramatically different organization if you could create this. It would, the whole culture would feel very different. And it's kind of thing that is needed in government. Government is so bureaucratic. The reason we're seeing autocracies spread around the world, I think, is because governments perform so badly. And people are frustrated that they can't get their governments to work well. So they resort to autocrats who can get things done, or they think they can get things done.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Totally.
And,
No,
Al Gore 30 years ago tried to do this to the federal government. You remember that, this reinventing government thing when he was vice president under Bill Clinton? But Gore lost the election to Bush and everything stopped. It's really a shame because they had some real headway going. They were making some real progress in changing the way government works. I think that should be revisited. I'm disappointed that we don't see that in our government. There's no attempt to do something about the bureaucracy. This would lend it. This would solve. This is exactly what government needs. And it's good that schools are doing it, but even schools, they face such a battle because the traditionalists want the public schools to retain control. They're reluctant to give up control to charter schools and to provide vouchers so that kids can go to other schools. There's the mainstream in education, the unions, I think, to want the old system where the school superintendent ran a bureaucracy, and all the schools, had to do what they were told, and that's what created terrible performance, I think, and very little innovation. So vouchers and charter schools, I think, are interjecting a healthy dose of innovation into our school system, but it's badly resisted.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, my experience has been with the National Institutes of Health, which is an extraordinarily large, I guess you could say, bureaucracy, but there has recently been added a new entity there called ARPA-H, based upon DARPA, which is Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. And so what they've done is they had an advanced research project entity for health, and they're being totally innovative. And the people who are, there'll be some staff who are, employed, but they're hiring a lot of people to run the projects who are going to be there for very time limited periods. And it's going to be very entrepreneurial. They're being given total authority to do their job. We don't know how it's going to work out yet, but I know they're starting a number of things there. And DARPA from the military has worked out amazingly well. They did things like invent the internet, although Al Gore did not do that. But the same sort of thing, I hope will happen with ARPA.
Let Al Gore rest in peace. Poor guy.
I'm
He
joking.
keeps getting bashed over that.
No, I'm just joking. That's a common joke.
Yeah,
But I'm
the
waiting to see how
military
ARPA
even,
comes out.
there are lots of areas where the military has even done this. In fact, when they talk about, I don't know their terms they use, but they give special forces units are usually given lots of autonomy when they go into hostile territory. That's a good example of this. They're like independent units.
Yeah, well, they're the special ops, and they
Yeah.
basically run totally independently.
Yeah.
In areas where they don't even have communication many times
Yeah.
with their superiors.
Yeah,
And so they have to have autonomy.
exactly.
Yeah, and they're also, not total analogy, but if you go look at submarines, submarines are pretty much based by themselves. If you're running 600 feet below the Pacific, you can't just go and, go to the central command and see what's happening. You have to be in a totally autonomous entity. And yes, there is communication, but you're basically running the show yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It's a powerful idea. We don't hear enough about it. I'm disappointed that we thought Russell and I did a lot of work on it. We held conferences, we published books. He was more forceful and got better attention than I did, of course. But we both worked on this together, and it was a battle. It was hard to get people to take it seriously.
Well, it's threatening. People don't want to change the status quo if they're in a level of position of authority.
Yeah. But I think it's a wave of the future. I don't see how else we're going to meet with all the craziness going on in the world by running organizations from the top down. The way when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russell and I would use that as an example to highlight the problem in American corporations. We would point out that American corporations were run like the Soviet Union, planned economies. That's what a hierarchical control is. It's a planned economy, like the Soviet Union. Well, I think we've exhausted this topic unless there's something else you want to talk about. I'm sorry we didn't have more people. It's a shame. This is such a great topic. All these talks were probably really good. They deserve an audience. It's too bad we can't do that.
Well, I have a bit of a question more on the culture and sort of communication, maybe between sort of units and into the organization as a whole. Perhaps it fits into what you mentioned a little while ago as one of the central functions. So is it, would you see it as part of leadership's role and I know sort of mentoring and coaching, and that might sort of fall better into kind of one-on-one, or does it fall into communications? How do you get the units to kind of speak into the holistic sort of maybe view of an organization, or does that really fall away and it sits now within each sort of business or each product division? Where does that whole holistic view of an organization sort of fall away? How do you keep a culture going now? How do you create a culture? How do you change a culture now if everybody's sitting in their own one, driving it? I mean, I know they will develop their own individual culture, but now does that need to speak to the overall one? How does that change now get incorporated? How does a leadership, or how do leadership manage that and change that, especially if you see something sort of changing in a way that maybe you don't want it to, or do you let that unravel and go with that? That would just be something that's interesting to me, or interest to me.
That's a really great point, Candace. You're exactly right. And there's a tension there, because what you're creating is what's been called a confederation of entrepreneurs. You've created an internal market system where every unit is entrepreneurial, and so they're going to be different. And the difference is necessary. If you allow people freedom, they will do different things. They will, because their environments are different. But yet you've got to create a common culture to hold all this together. That's the tension. And you do it by celebrating their differences. It's a confederation of entrepreneurs. You're all different, that's fine, but we can learn from each other. And we gather our common best practices, the tough ideas that we've learned, we consolidate those into our common repository of knowledge, so that enriches the corporate culture, and we draw on that. So you celebrate your differences and use the different ideas as power to drive the system. And I think that's just part of life today. We have to accept differences. We have to learn how to talk across differences, how to deal with different people. Look, our country, for instance, is riven by all these differences. The Trump people and whatever. And we've got to learn how to deal with people who are different than us. That's one of the great challenges of our time.
Well, that's a great answer, because as a communications person, when you're putting that language together and you're putting a piece together, I think those are exactly the right type of words to be putting together that unite people and start to put it all together. So that's really nice. I like the way you put that. Thanks very much. I enjoyed that.
And it fits in with the diversity stuff, because now you got people from different backgrounds and different sexual orientations, different races, and you've got to pull all that into a team somehow. So we've got to learn how to deal with differences. And that would be another whole topic for us, I think, differences.
I would say not only differences, but we got to be able to deal with people's strengths. We need to know where their contributions come from, and also where their weaknesses are, because you know what? You don't leverage people for their weaknesses, you leverage them for their strengths. So you want to be able to put them in the right positions so that, like you said, Bill, they can perform and actually contribute what skills and differences they bring.
Yeah, universities need it. Universities are planned economies. There's no relationship, as far as I can tell, between the performance of units and the resources they get.
Right.
Half of they allocate resources according to some formula that came out of the past, and there's the units that get more resources are complacent, so they don't have to work very hard. They're the medical school or whatever, and the law school, and the units that are deprived of resources, like business schools, are pissed off. So why should they knock themselves out? It's a terrible thing. It's terrible. We would improve universities enormously if we created some kind of a system where every unit is treated like the equivalent of a profit center, although it would focus on other goals like publications and grants and whatever, student satisfaction. and allocate resources according to whatever goals we agree on. And then let those units operate freely. Right now, it's a terrible bureaucracy. The curriculum committee in the business school is a nightmare of bureaucracy. They impose their own ideas on all the other departments. They're just rife with rules and committees imposing their views on all the other units. If they could transform to a system like this, I think higher education would be a lot more creative. And right now, they're not creative at all. I think they lag. Yeah. They lag. They pick up ideas from the public, from the business sector, because that's where the creativity is. And the entrepreneurs out there in the real world, and we just emulate that.
Well, that's a great ending to the presentation. Thank you, Bill. We're right here at the top of the hour now. And we want to thank those of you who have come out to hear us, as well as our dedicated followers. This will be on YouTube, so therefore we will be able to share it with others, and hopefully we can spread this message. Again, this is the virtual organization is here, so we need to make it work.
That's
Penny,
right.
can I say one thing, please?
Absolutely, Art. That's
what you've heard here today is the culmination of 9, count them, 9 full decades of experience. And Bill, tomorrow's a very important day for you, right? Is it tomorrow?
Oh, my birthday. Yeah, tomorrow. It is tomorrow.
Yeah,
right.
Bill, and tomorrow, Bill enters his 10th decade of life. And based on the past 9 decades, we certainly wish you that you continue, you're doing so well, continue on for another decade and keep sharing your wisdom and growing that wisdom and sharing it with us, Bill. Congratulations. And maybe you want to make a pitch for your GoFundMe site, Bill. You know, Bill has shared his work on the democratic enterprise and this new enterprise, but he's gone well beyond this. His book his latest book talks about, you know, a rise in consciousness globally. Bill, do you want to give a pitch for your GoFundMe site?
Yeah, tomorrow is my birthday, 90th birthday. It's hard to believe. I don't know how this happened. Mel Brooks was on a show with Johnny Carson once, and they were looking at old photos of themselves where they had black hair. And he said, "Johnny, I don't understand how this happened. There we were, young, happy, black hair. I went out for a ham sandwich. I came back and I was old." That's the way it feels. You know, you're living your life and all of a sudden you're old.
But go out for a sandwich.
Yeah, the project is called Portal to Global Consciousness. It's a simple idea, but very powerful. The basic problem today is that most people are motivated by self-interest, money, and power. That's not going to get us there. The problems are so enormous, and they're global problems. And so what we need is a global consciousness. And the idea is that we would build a website, a very sophisticated website, uses state-of-the-art technology to take people through an audio-visual experience where they would make a shift in their consciousness, where they would be shown what global consciousness is about, and they would be allowed to experience it the way William Shatner did. You know, Captain Kirk, when he went into space a few months ago, he came back, he was overwhelmed. He experienced global consciousness. All the astronauts experienced it. They called it the overview effect. So the idea is to build a website to allow people to see that, experience that. But it's not going well. I can't get the attention, the help I need.
Well, that's why I wanted to promote it. We'll do our best to promote it, Bill.
Thank you for bringing that up, Art. That's very generous of you. Thank you all for allowing me to continue to shoulder on at in my dotage.
Happy birthday, Bill.
So
way to end it.
Bye-bye.
Have a lovely day. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.